Today on, it always starts out weird, guys. Okay. Today on episode 74, it's part 2 of my classroom management series where I discuss how to implement your classroom management plan right from that very first day of school. Okay. Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lepre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. I'm so glad that you came back today for part 2 of this series on classroom management. In the last episode, I discussed how to frame the way you think about classroom management, as well as coming up with rules and consequences. If you haven't listened to episode 73 yet, I highly suggest that you hit pause right now and go back to that one first. So, why is classroom management such a big deal? Have you ever seen a classroom where everyone sits silently and obediently? Have you ever seen a classroom where students are busy and actively learning? Or have you seen one where students are screaming, running around, and the teacher can't get them to settle down? All of those are examples of good and bad classroom management. In our minds, we would love it if our students would just listen to us and do what we ask, but we also know that that's just a dream. Or is it? Can we really expect that from students? Whoops. Can we really expect that from students? All right. So then, where did I leave off? If you have the right classroom management plan and you implement it properly, you really can have that perfect classroom where everyone is actively and happily engaging. It might be what we can call controlled chaos because students are so into what they're doing. You've obviously seen this in action, so it must be possible, right? But as a new teacher, it seems to be more difficult and daunting because classroom management is just one component that we have to think about while teaching. I mean, you've also got standards, checking for understanding, student engagement, assessments. You know what I mean. Here's the thing. If you get your classroom management plan down pat from the very beginning, meaning that first day of school, you actually spend less time worrying about it later on. Seriously, it just happens naturally. So here's how to implement your plan correctly from the start. Now, the key to having a relatively smooth year in terms of classroom management is to first set the right tone. You want a tone that is warm, safe, and businesslike. Students want to like their teachers, and part of liking you and feeling safe is knowing where the boundaries are. This is crucial because if your tone is off, you're going to have battles all year long. You can diminish the number of troublemakers by simply connecting with them right away. So right off the bat, students will be noticing different things. They'll notice your appearance, your body language, your tone of voice, and your facial expressions. Being businesslike but friendly will put them at ease but also communicate that education happens here. So even if you have younger students that need more hand-holding, they need to understand that you're not their parent and you won't let them get away with everything. There's definitely this balancing act that has to happen here. You know that you can't be too nice and you can't be too strict. Too nice, and your students will automatically think you're a pushover. I mean, sure, they'll like you instantly. In fact, they'll like you so much that they'll show you every facet of their personality without any regard to others. And when you try to discipline them, they won't take you seriously or they're going to wonder why you're being a jerk. Now, on the other side, if you're too strict, then students will fear you, but only for so long. For the students that tend to have behavior problems in the classroom, you've actually just presented a challenge to them, a quite delicious challenge. They will dig in, and no amount of consequences will get them in line. And probably their parents have already given up on them and are used to receiving messages and requests for conferences. And these students will behave just long enough to not be held in from recess or lunch. And then when they get back, they will proceed to be bunkers in your classroom. One way to set a positive tone is to not go over the rules on the first day. This might be a little bit controversial, but hear me out. Now, with younger grades, you need to explicitly teach the basics of like how to line up, how to go to the bathroom, how to raise your hand, where to hang your backpack, things like that. But you don't need to go over a million rules the first day you meet them. And especially for secondary, don't start with the rules. They just met you. Can you imagine going on a first date with someone listing off a bunch of do's and don'ts about yourself? Nope, that came out wrong. Can you imagine going on a first date with someone and listing off a bunch of do's and don'ts about yourself? I mean, the same goes for your students. These students, they've already learned some basic rules from elementary school, so assume that they'll all automatically implement those, at least on the first day. Okay, on the first day, take the time to let them get to know you, learn about the fun things you'll be doing this year, and perhaps where everything is in your classroom, if necessary. Then teach them the policies and procedures throughout that first week. Drip it out over several days and allow them to practice and demonstrate it. And, I've heard of teachers, and actually I've done this in the past, I'm going to be completely honest with you, where I've spent an hour on that first day discussing classroom rules and grading policies. And I cringe when I think about this. I mean, seriously, you've just completely turned off your students. You are now like every other teacher that talks at them, and you'll have to work harder to build relationships with them. If you're in secondary, all of your students' teachers on the first day, they're going to be super boring. So you should stand out by embedding the boring stuff like the rules and policies and all of that around activities that are more engaging. Now for me, in order to set the right tone, I plan engaging activities right off the bat that encourage students to work together. I love to do the activity Slip or Trip, and it's basically where students have to decide what happened to a man who's laying at the bottom of a staircase. This gets students actually really excited, and so they naturally engage with each other. And it also sets the tone that my classroom is going to be fun and exciting. And then as they are working together and displaying behaviors, I can sneak in what they should and shouldn't do. So if they start to do something like volunteer an answer without raising their hand, I can kind of sneak in a rule right there. Do you see how I do that? And it doesn't seem like I'm like super strict or super nice. It's just that it's lots of super learning. And when you get your new group of students each year, you're going to find that they have a mishmash of different types of behaviors. So some teachers from their previous school this is because they have learned lots of different sets of rules. So some teachers will be stricter than you and have a lot of rules, while others are pretty relaxed and just go with the flow. So you're going to hear, but last year, Mrs. So-and-so let us talk while we work, or, well, Mr. So-and-so said that we just had to use a little hand signal if we're going to the bathroom and then we go. And this is why it is important to actually teach your rules and consequences, but not necessarily on the first day or even all of them within the first week. So, like I just said, spread the rules out and expectations. Also because students, no, I don't like that. Another reason why you want to spread out how you teach your rules and expectations over maybe the first week or two is that students can only remember so much in the beginning. Now, especially if they're in secondary, because now they have multiple sets of rules from multiple teachers. And a lot of the rules are common sense, but we're talking about policies in terms of going to the bathroom or raising their hand or walking around. They have to remember what everybody allows. And students will quickly learn your expectations and will be more than happy to meet those if they've already established a good relationship with you. And when someone breaks a rule in the beginning, you want to implement that first consequence without humiliating them. You don't want to say, okay, so this is an example of blah, 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 blah. Don't use them as an example. That's just really bad, and they're never going to recover from that. You could just pause and give them the teacher look, and then later you can privately talk to them and ask them if they knew why you had to stop and look at them, or why you had to crouch down and talk to them. But don't call them out, even though you want to implement your rules right away. Don't do it in a way that's humiliating. And when you do go over your rules and expectations, this is super important. You want to take the time to demonstrate and model what they should and shouldn't do. Then have them model what they should do. So if you use a hand signal for going to the bathroom, have them model, and then you show them what you're going to do so they know exactly what to expect. Then have a student act out what they shouldn't do. So we're kind of role playing here. And then have your other students raise their hand and explain what that student did wrong. And then finally, you can have other students explain what will be the consequence for those behaviors. Now, when it comes time to enforcing the rules, do not get emotional. And this is where you're going to have to learn how to control that instinct to snap or get mad or just kind of have that upset face. And I'm not talking about your teacher look, just the one that you can't control. You need to be very matter of fact when you are giving out a consequence. You don't want the student to believe in any way that you don't like them. Once they feel that the relationship is damaged, they'll stop trying to please you or even want to listen to you. So you have to relocate them somehow and just calmly say, I need you to sit over there for now, okay? Just for today, thanks. Now, if they say, well, why? Or if they stall, then you could say, we'll talk about it in a minute, but for now, I need you to sit there. And if they still won't do it, this is where you're going to give them a choice. Okay, you have two choices. You can move over there for today and we'll have a brief conversation about it later. Or you can stay here and I have to ask the assistant principal to take you to their office while I call home. Or something like that. You can also add, one of these choices involves just talking it out with me, while the other involves more consequences. It's your choice. And at this point, you've put the ball in their court. Okay? And again, it's not because you were being mean, it's because that's the choice that they made. So you want to make sure that this is not like where you use your angry voice or you say that you're disappointed in them or you use a babyish voice like, oh, you need to move. You don't want to do any of that. You want it to be completely unemotional and matter of fact. That's how you save that relationship with the student. And here's the thing, you have to follow through. So if they decide that they're going to stay there and you have to call the administrator or assistant principal, don't be scared or flake out because you don't want to do that or because you're scared to call home. That student needs to know that you mean business, and when you do that, they'll never ever decide to break the rules, and they'll also know that you don't make empty promises. Does that make sense? Or I'll say it a different way. If you don't follow through, they're never going to follow your directions in the future, and they're going to think that you make empty promises. So, here's where the parents fit in. If you have a frequent flyer who can't seem to follow the rules, chances are that their parent has been made aware of it in the past. Most likely other teachers are having the same issues. Some parents will deal with the child after being contacted, while many times others will defend the child and insist that you got it wrong, you're being unfair, or you're picking on their kid. Whenever you want to contact a parent about a behavior issue, you have to stay fairly emotionless about it and just state the facts, just like you did with the student. You don't want to get upset and indignant. This is really important. It's so easy to come off as not liking their kid. So you have to be careful how you explain the behaviors and what you did to try to fix the problem. Okay? Yeah, I can't emphasize this more. You have to try to keep your calm and make it sound like, well, this happened and this is what I did. And don't come in with swords ablazing and put the parent on the defense. It's the worst thing you can do. In that situation, there's no way you can win. They may even go straight to your administrator and complain about how you handled the situation. Even if they know it, nobody likes to hear that their child is a monster. So don't communicate that you feel that way. Whenever I have to email or call a parent about a behavior, I first explain what happened in class. I follow up with why, in general, their child is great, and then explain that the student needs reinforcement from both school and at home so that they can be successful in class. Then I ask if they could help me out by talking to their student about what happened and how they can prevent it from happening in the future. So here's an example. Today, I had to ask Johnny to sit down 5 times. He was walking around, talking to people on his way to the trash can, and was, in general, a disruption and nuisance in class. Okay, so that's one way I could describe the behavior. Or, today Johnny had difficulty staying in his seat. Well, I realized that he needed to throw something away as well as get a tissue. He was talking to other students along the way, which made it very difficult for me to teach my lesson and for other students to focus. I'm hoping we can work together and talk to him about what is and isn't acceptable behavior so that he can continue to be successful in my class. So you see how I did that? It was just matter of fact, here's what they did, here's what happened, here's why I'm emailing you. Let's work together and fix this. Okay? You're more likely to get a parent to cooperate. Also, you need to document every phone call and email exchange, including whether or not the parent answered. So even if you attempted it and they didn't answer, log it. This way, if a parent says that you never told them about their child's behavior or you never even tried, you have proof. And when you send that student to the counselor or administrator, you can also show them what you've done to try to remedy the problem, because they will ask you. So here are some final thoughts on this. In teacher preparation programs, a lot of time is spent on rules, tokens, and consequences. These mainly work in the earlier grades, like elementary, but in middle school and high school, they develop apathy towards them, or they eventually learn that they don't need to comply unless you reward them. You end up teaching them to expect some sort of token in exchange for doing something that they should be doing anyway. Also, yelling is not discipline. Yelling is an attempt to instill fear in order to control a class. After a while, the students consider your yelling voice as your regular voice, and I can tell you this from experience when I started teaching English. So there's not much left to do when you're actually serious. They just think you're being normal. Also, as I mentioned, humiliating or punishing students in front of everyone will backfire. It will be harder to repair that relationship later, and they'll stop trusting you. It may seem easier at first to punish a student for misbehaving right on the spot, using that, snap judgment and your anger. But when the threat and fear of punishment disappears, what do you have left with them? Being proactive and patiently teaching a student how to behave will go much further and leave you with less stress. And to go on along with that, if a student is a repeat offender on a daily basis, and as hard as this is, you should wipe the slate clean each day. Give them a new opportunity to right the wrong and demonstrate that they've learned how they should behave. And this, you guys, I'm not going to lie, it can be really, really difficult. And I have to already deal with this with a particular student this year. And I just finished my 2nd week of school. And it's difficult, especially if the student is getting on your nerves. Chances are that student already knows that you're annoyed with them and they feel like they can't win your trust again. So they just continue to act up and you end up having a miserable year. So I invite you to take a listen to episode 62, where I discuss how to repair the relationship with a student that chronically misbehaves. This is definitely worth listening to, especially when you have that one student that doesn't seem to get it. So between this episode and the last episode, I hope this gives you more information, more tools under your belt in terms of classroom management. You have to come up with the plan and you have to implement it correctly and you have to enforce it. And I assure you, once you get that part down, you're just going to have a smoother year with very few problems popping up. And when they do, you can just revert to your rules and consequences. And if it's gotten bad for just one student, then you just repair that relationship and then you're back on track. So I'd really suggest that you take some time. You might want to be decorating your classroom or planning your curriculum right now for back to school. But really, planning classroom management is so key to be able to implement anything that you plan in terms of curriculum.